sort of being on the downer. We don't need more in terms of a shiur to bring us down a little bit. And let's actually take a more positive stance. We know that according to Chazal, we're taught that Moshiach is born on Tisha B'Av. It doesn't necessarily mean literally born on Tisha B'Av, but the same way the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash took place on Tisha B'Av, that began the process of the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. We always have to remind ourselves of that we're on this path towards the building of the Beit HaMikdash and to the coming of Moshiach. And most significantly, we have the terminology that the name of Moshiach is Menachem. That doesn't mean literally that Moshiach's name is Menachem, but again, there's a comfort for us to know that we're heading towards this goal of Moshiach. And the truth is, for us, living here in Eretz Yisrael and everything that we're experiencing, as we'll see through shiur, we're getting there. And we have to feel that comfort even during these difficult times. But there's so much misinformation that's out there about Moshiach, who Moshiach is, what Moshiach will do, when is Moshiach coming, and that's what I want to go through with us tonight and use some very primary sources to do so. So we're going to start right in the very beginning. Source number one, it's the Rambam. We all know it because we sing it. It's amazing. I've always felt that there's always this, we know so much more Torah because of the songs that we sing. I wish that we would just take so many more psukim and put them to great songs, and then we'd know much more about what's out there, right? Does anybody know all the Ani Mamins by heart? No. We know number 1, we know number 12. We know number 12 because of Moshiach, and we know number 1 because Dveikus, a number of years ago, put it to a song about belief in Hashem. But we all know these words. Let's just read it for a moment, and then we're going to see the Rambam really expand it a lot more in the future sources. So number 1, the Rambam, Yud Gimel Ikrim, Mispar Yud Bet, the 12th one, Ani ma'amin be'emuna shlema, I believe with complete and total faith, Beviat HaMashiach, in the coming of Mashiach, Be'af al pi sheyit mamea. It's amazing how the Rambam adds in these additional words. And even though it delays, Im kol zeh achaka lo b'chol yom sheyavo, I still wait for him to come. I think to myself about all the people who said these words in the most impossible of circumstances. And here we are in the time that we live. It's so much easier for us to say, Im kol zeh achaka lo b'chol yom sheyavo, because you really do feel like it's right there. We just have to get across the finish line, and we'll get there. So let's go through the Rambam. Is going to explain much more detail in terms of what this is all about, who Mashiach is, what he has to accomplish. So let's go through that. So we're going to start in source number 2, the Rambam in Hilchot Melachim Milchamot, Perek Yud Aleph. Now remember, the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, he's basically compiling all of these sources from throughout Shas, from throughout the Nevi'im. He doesn't always tell us, usually does not tell us, where the source is from, but that's why it's so helpful to read the Rambam, because he sort of puts it all together in a story for us to understand. So here we go. Halacha Aleph. Hamelech HaMashiach Atid La'amod. So first and foremost, he's a king, the king that will be anointed in the future, the Mashiach. What's he going to do? He's going to stand up, Ulahachzir Malchut Beit David Liyoshna. HaMemshala Harishona. It's funny hearing the word Memshala because we use it in terms of all of our Memshalot, right? We've had 35 in our 70 and somewhat years. But he says the first goal of the Melech Mashiach is to restore the Malchut Beit David. We are going to go back to the ultimate form of leadership according to the Torah, and that is to actually have a Melech, and a Melech that specifically comes from David HaMelech. There's a lot of discussion as to why is that the ultimate ideal, right? One would think, you read through the Navi, you read through Sefer Melachim and beyond, and my goodness, it's for the most part one disaster after another of Melachim who have absolute power and how the absolute power absolutely corrupts. So it's a little bit of a problem for us to understand. But the ideal really is that we live in a world where we have a Melech. We'll see exactly what his qualities have to be in a moment. And it's a Melech who helps us focus on the fact that ultimately there's a Rabbonu Shalom who's the Melech Malchei HaMelechim. So he has to bring back the Malchut Beit David. Ubone Mikdash. Okay, very straightforward, very clear. His goal, his role is to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash and Umekabeth Nidchei Yisrael, and to bring back all of the Jews from all around the world. Not just the Jews, that terminology of Nidchei Yisrael is very, very deliberate, and it also refers to all the tribes that we've lost over the generations, and I'll come back to that towards the end. So very specific goals. Now, is the Rambam talking about a specific order? It does seem that way. First, he brings that back to Malchut Beit David. Number 2, he builds a Beit HaMikdash. Number 3, brings back all of the Nidchei Yisrael. Notice, it doesn't say Hashem will miraculously take all the Jews and somehow fly them to Israel. It's a very, very specific physical process led by a leader over here. He restores the kingdom. He goes and builds the Beit HaMikdash. Not that Hashem brings it down from Shemayim. And he brings the Jews back from Galut. Not that Hashem miraculously makes that happen. And what happens then? V'chozrin kol ha'mishpatim b'yamav kishayu mikodem. All the rules will come back, the Rambam says, as they were before. Number 1, very interesting, he says, makrivin korbanot. We will go back to bringing korbanot. There's some controversy about that. Rav Kook seemed to be of the opinion that we're going to have the minchat, the korbanot, the flower offerings, but not go back to actual animal offerings. But certainly from our tefillot and from the thrust of the Torah and the centrality of korbanot, it does seem like that would return. Osin shmitin v'yoblot, even though we have Shemitah today, that's more on a rabbinic level, but Shemitah and Yovel will return. Kechol mitzvatan amra b'Torah. Every single halacha in the Torah will come back. When you read through the mitzvot of the Torah, you see that in our generation, in our times, even with living in Eretz Yisrael, we are nowhere near the 613 mitzvot. There's very few mitzvot. The Chavetz Chaim wrote a Sefer Mitzvot, a small little book, talking about what mitzvot we have today, because so much revolves around the Beit HaMikdash. Says the Rambam, all of that will come back. He's going to get into more detail in a moment, but now he says, V'chol mi, a little bit of inspiration from the Rambam. V'chol mi she'eno ma'amin bo. Anybody who doesn't believe in the Moshiach, or mi she'eno mechake leviato, you're not waiting every single moment, feeling like you're lacking something without Moshiach. Lo bishar neviim belvad hu kofer. That person is not only rejecting the neviim who speak in more detail about Moshiach, ela b'Torah uva Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rambam wants us to understand that the Moshiach is in the Torah itself. It doesn't say that terminology of Melech HaMashiach in the way that we normally use that terminology, but it's very, very clear. The Torah itself is referring to Mashiach. Where? Shaharei Torah me'ida Allah. The Torah testifies that there's a Mashiach. Where? Shenemar v'shav Hashem elokecha et shvutcha v'richamecha. Hashem is going to bring us back to Eretz Yisrael. V'shav v'kibetzcha mikol ha'amim. He's going to bring you back from all around the world. No matter how far cast off you are, Hashem will bring you back from there, and he'll bring you back to Eretz Yisrael. Unbelievable. That's the pasuk the Rambam quotes for the essence of Mashiach. We, all of us who are watching this and learning together in Eretz Yisrael, we are living this essence of Mashiach according to the Rambam. It doesn't mean we've reached the final goal, but that is the pasuk the Rambam chose to capture the essence of Mashiach. He chooses the kibbutz galuyot, which is an amazing thing. So we've all been blessed to be part of this process. Now let's go into who this Mashiach is and what he does. Halacha Gimel. Al yale al datcha. You should not think shehamelech hamashiach, that this king Mashiach tzarich lasot otot umoftim. This is such an important point. All of us assume Mashiach is going to be some miracle worker, some person who's beyond the rules of this world. Rambam says, "Umechadish dvarim ba'olam." Don't think he's going to be a person who does miracles or brings anything new into the world. O machaya metim. He's not going to bring about the resurrection of the dead. We'll come back to that in a moment, because I always grew up grew up being taught Mashiach comes, and the people who have passed away come back to life. And it's just not true. It is true that Tchiyat HaMetim comes at some point after Mashiach, but it is not hand in hand together. This Mashiach is not going to make Tchiyat HaMetim happen. Uchayotze b'devarim elu, anything like this magical, and the Rambam uses very harsh language, Shahatip Shemomrim, which foolish people say, Ein hadavar kain. This Mashiach is not a miracle worker. We'll see in a moment he's a special person, but no crazy miracles the way possibly we might think the Mashiach will come. And now the Rambam actually gives a proof to this. Shahri Rabbi Akiva. Let's go back for a moment historically. Rabbi Akiva, Chacham Gadol, the Chachmei Mishnah. We know that Rabbi Akiva was a very wise man. He was among the Tanaim in the Mishnah. V'hu haya nosei kelev shel Ben Kuzba HaMelech. He was the arms bearer for Ben Kuzba, who was Bar Kochva during the Bar Kochva revolt against the Romans. V'hu haya omer alav shehu melech Mashiach. Rabbi Akiva believed that Bar Kochva was the Mashiach. We had the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and now he's leading us back to another Beit HaMikdash. They all thought that Bar Kochva was the Mashiach. Ad sheneharag ba'avonot, but then he was killed. Kevan sheneharag, once he was killed, no de she'en zeh. They realized he wasn't the Mashiach, and v'lo shalu menu chachamim lo ot v'lo modfeit. They didn't ask for any kind of miracles. There was no indication at all that Bar Kochva was able to do any miracles. He was just a strong leader, a person who was able to lead the people. It certainly was a Talmid Chacham. We'll see exactly in a moment what kind of people they have to be, the Mashiach has to be. But they believed that he was the Mashiach just because he was a great leader who was leading them, and no miracles at all. This is a critical point for us to understand. There's not some miraculous being that flies down from the sky and does miracles, but he's a regular person, a regular leader who emerges amongst the Jewish people. Who is that person? Says the Rambam in Halacha Dal. V'im yamod melech libeit David. If someone stands up amongst the Jewish people and becomes a king type figure, hoge b'Torah, he has to be someone who is well versed in the Torah, v'osek b'mitzvot, and he has to be somebody who's keeping mitzvot, ki David Aviv, just like David HaMelech, his forefather, ki Torah shebechtav v'shebal peh. He's a person who clearly leads the people in keeping Torah shebechtav and Torah shebal peh. V'yachuf b'kol Yisrael leilech ba u'lechazik, and all the Darko and all of Bnei Yisrael start following the Torah, are inspired by him in his ways, and Yilachem Melchamot Hashem. This is a person who fights the battles of Hashem. That could mean actual army. That also could mean just fighting for religion. That person, Hareze Becheskat Shehu Mashiach. The Rambam says at that point, all of Am Yisrael can say, okay, this person seems to have a chazakah that he's the Mashiach. So again, he comes from Beit David. Now, in our generation, we don't know exactly, but obviously it cannot be in that case a Kohen or a Levi, somebody who's amongst Israel. We lowly Israelis finally make our comeback, and we have our Melech who comes to serve for us. He's a person who is a Talmid Chacham and inspires Am Yisrael in Torah and mitzvot, fighting the wars of Hashem. We can say chazaka, that he's a Mashiach, but not for sure yet. Just we can follow him as Mashiach. Im asav v'hitzliach v'nitzeach kol ha'umot shesvivav. If he then goes out and he defeats all of the nations that are around us, Ubana Mikdash, and he built the Beit HaMikdash, says the Rambam, Bimkomo, in its rightful place, the Kibetz Nidchei Yisrael, and he works to gather in Am Yisrael, Harei Ze Mashiach Bivadai. The Rambam says that person is the Mashiach. There is no other test. He leads Am Yisrael in a spiritual inspiration and resurrection. He fights the wars of Hashem and defeats, he says, all of our enemies around us. Now, the question is, does it have to be an outright defeat? Can it mean that he brings them all to the point where they surrender to Am Yisrael? He builds the Beit HaMikdash in its place, and he brings Am Yisrael back. That person is Moshiach, according to the Rambam. V'im lo hitzliach ad kol, if he doesn't do all of those things, o neherag, or he's killed, biyadua she'eno zeh she'vticha la Torah, then that was not the Moshiach. He's a great, wonderful king who passed away, just like other melachim from Malchut Beit David. Says the Rambam, finishing this point, when that king stands up in truth, and he raises up all of Am Yisrael, miyad kulam, all of the world, they will learn that their faith is sheker, it's false, that they were misled. Not just Am Yisrael, but all of the nations of the world, according to the Rambam, they will come and they are going to recognize him as this spiritual leader. An unbelievable description about what's supposed to happen or who this person is supposed to be. So it's a very clear process of a leader emerging amongst the Jewish people who inspires, first of all, the Jewish people spiritually, fights the wars of Hashem with our external enemies, builds the Beit HaMikdash, and brings us to Kibbutz Galuyot. Let's continue in source number 3, where the Rambam in the next parak, in parak Yud Bet, tells us more about what's supposed to happen when Mashiach comes. Halacha Aleph. Al Yala al Alev, you should not think, Shebiyamot HaMashiach, that in the days of Mashiach, Yivatel Davar Min HaHago Shel Olam, that something's going to change from the way the world works. Will there be internet? Yes. Will there be sports? Yes. The things that we know in the world are going to be there. Okay, we got some thumbs up for some things, and who knows? Maybe even my I can't even say I used to always use my football team in the example, but now their name is changing. But the Washington football team, which is doing very badly, maybe they'll start to win some championships again. But nothing's going to change. Actually, that would be changing the world. So I guess it has to stay the way it is now. Don't think that anything crazy will happen. There won't be any change in nature. Ela olam kiminhago noheg. The world continues as we know it. Now, wait a minute. Don't we have all kinds of prophecies about crazy rules of nature changing? It says, B'Yishaya, V'gar ze'evim keves. What do you mean? It says that the wool and the lamb, that the wolf and the lamb are going to lay together. Everything will be very different. V'namerim gedi yirvatz. What is that? Mashal v'chida. The Rambam says that's just a mashal. Hadavar sheyu Yisrael yoshvin lavetach imrishe akum hamoshlim kese'e v'namer. Rambam says all that means is that we will have peace. That will change. That's the one thing that will change, as opposed to Am Yisrael being persecuted and being chased and always fighting for our lives. We will live at peace with the umot ha'olam, and that is what those psukim mean. And not only that, the yachzaru kulam ledat ha'emet. The whole world will come to the true faith. Velo yigzalu l'ashchitu elayochu davar hamutar benachat in Yisrael. Everyone will just get along with one another, with the Jewish people, and that's what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. That's the change that will take place. Peace for Am Yisrael with the nations of the world, and the nations of the world coming to understand that Judaism is the truth. This does not mean that they will become Jews, but rather they will accept as B'nai Noach to keep the laws that they have to keep. And that is the way the world will function, with Am Yisrael being the spiritual center in Yerushalayim and giving that spirituality to the rest of the world. Says the Rambam, continuing at the bottom of the page, Amru Chachamim and Halacha Bet, Ein bein olam hazeh li'imot HaMashiach. There is no difference between the world we live in today and the Imot HaMashiach, Ella Shibud Malchut. Only difference is going to be Bilvad. Only difference is that we are no longer going to be beholden to the kingdoms of the world, but that is all that's going to change. But the Rambam does say, as we finish off the first page, Yira mipshuta shel divrei neviim, it does seem, in terms of the process that according to the Nevi'im, shebetchilat imot HaMashiach tia milchemet Gog uMagog. We have this concept. We don't know very much about it, but that there's going to be this war of Gog and Magog. V'shekodem milchemet Gog uMagog, says the Rambam, before that war, Ya'amod Navi liyasher Yisrael. There is going to be a prophet before that war that comes to inspire the Jewish people. Ulahachen libam, and to prepare them for Mashiach, shenemar, hinei anochi sholech lachem et Eliyahu Navi. That is the role of this Navi. There's going to be some Navi who's going to come first, and then there's Gog and Magog. Says the Rambam, and I want you to look just a few lines down. If you see over here, I'll just try to highlight it for a minute, towards the end of that paragraph. Says the Rambam, Ula olam lo yitasek adam b'divrei hagadot. Don't do what I just did. Don't start dealing with all these agadot. Don't try to delve into these things about what all these prophecies mean. Don't make them a priority at all. Why? And this is very important because the topic of Mashiach can be a very big distraction. It can be a very big distraction because we get so caught up in it and trying to figure out when is it and what is it and what's happening. But says the Rambam, these things don't help. She'ein miviin lo lidei yira. They don't bring a person to more yirat Hashem, but lo lidei ahava. They don't bring you to more avat Hashem. We are here to work on our yirat Hashem, to be better people in terms of our relationship with Hashem and avat Hashem. That's what we're here for. We're not here to figure out the X's and O's of the coming of Mashiach. Don't try to figure out when it's going to come. And he says that's not the right thing. That's not what a person's supposed to do. Okay. Let's just finish off two more points about this in the Rambam, and then we'll move on to violating what the Rambam said a little bit, because we are going to see some things about signs of Mashiach coming and what actually has to happen. Says the Rambam in Halacha Gimel, B'mei HaMelech HaMashiach, in the days of this king, he's going to be established as the king. Imagine this scene. My goodness gracious, this is a dream. All of Bnei Israel come and revolve themselves around one person. I was just watching today the Knesset channel and seeing this scene there. A massive fight today about an issue of religion and state, and it's just so painful to see Am Yisrael in that state. Imagine all of us coming together around this one leader. He will have a Ruach HaKodesh from Hashem that will come, and he will lead Am Yisrael spiritually. Halacha Hey, Uva'ota Hazman, when Mashiach comes, Lo yasham lo ra'av, there will not be famine, lo milchama, there won't be war, lo kin'ah, no jealousy, v'tacharut, or competition. I mean, to me, this is changing the nature of the world in a very significant way. But all those things will go away. Shatova tia mushupat arbe, good. That is what is going to be out there, harbe. V'chol ha'ma'adanim, and all the earthly pleasures which we all run after as we try to keep up with people around us, with ziyun ka'afar. It's going to be like dust because we won't care about those things anymore. What will be the world's function? We'll still work and we'll still do things, but when we're working, it's going to be to sustain ourselves so we can worship Hashem the way it's ideally supposed to be. Today, it's so hard. When we go buy things, it's going to be so we can have what we need so we can properly serve Hashem. It's not going to be the pursuit of Gashmiut, which we're so involved with in the world today. It's all going to be Ladat Hashem Bilvad. Ulefikach, he says, Yiyu Yisrael Chachamim Gdolim V'Yodvim Dvarim Hastumim. We will have a whole new level of knowledge and understanding. V'Yasigu Dat Boram. We will understand so much more about Hashem. Kifi Kol Chadam, as each person can do. Shene'amar Kimala Haaretz Deyat Hashem Kamayim L'Yam Mechasim. That's what's going to happen. This incredible awareness of Hashem, knowledge of Hashem, connection to Hashem. That is what's going to happen when the Mashiach comes. One more Rambam that talks a little bit about some of the details, and it's actually Rambam in Hilchot Shuvah. It's very interesting. All of a sudden, in the middle of Hilchot Shuvah, towards the end, the Rambam throws this in Perek 10 Halacha Bet. Says the Rambam, just adds a few more points that we didn't have before in terms of who this person is. Sha'ota HaMelech Sheyamod Mizera David, that king who emerges from amongst the children of David HaMelech, Bal Chachmaya, is going to be a person of wisdom, Yeter Mishlomo, greater than Shlomo HaMelech. We've always been taught Shlomo HaMelech is the wisest of all people. This Melech HaMashiach will be wiser than Shlomo HaMelech. V'navi gadolhu, he will be a great Navi, Karov LaMoshe Rabbeinu, close to Moshe. Very deliberate language of the Rambam. Why Karov LaMoshe? No Navi can ever be on the level of Moshe and certainly not beyond Moshe, because then that person could come and say the Torah changes, which obviously the Melech HaMashiach won't do, but we never want to be able to say that anybody will be a Navi on a higher level than Moshe Rabbeinu or even equal with Moshe. Well, lefikach, what will this Melech do? Yilamid kol ha'am, he'll teach the nation. V'yora otam derech Hashem, he'll teach them about the ways of Hashem. V'yavo kol hagayim l'shomo, an amazing, beautiful picture in our minds. The whole world will come to hear him and tell us, and that's where the Rambam understands it. So this added dimension of Mashiach really inspiring the entire world. Now that takes us to the question of the how. In other words, we've gone through a little bit, but we've always been taught about this miraculous coming of Mashiach and supernatural things taking place. So what is it all about? So here we have what might be a well-known contradiction in the Psukim. And the Gemara asks the question about these Psukim. On the one hand, we have the Pasuk in Daniel, in source number 5, Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Gimel, where the Navi says, Chazei Havit, I was watching one night. I had a vision one night in middle of the night. Va'aru imanani shamaya. And behold, there were these clouds of heaven. Kvar inish kibar inish ase havai. And I saw a man coming. I saw this great scene of a man basically flying down from Shemayim. That's the way Daniel describes Mashiach coming. You go to Zechariah Navi in source number 6. Zechariah Navi says, Gili ma'od bat Zion, rejoice, daughter of Zion. Hari bat Yerushalayim, daughter of Yerushalayim, shout out for joy. Hinei malchech yavolach, your king is coming. Who is that king? That king is Tzaddik v'nosha. He's a Tzaddik, he's a victorious, righteous person, but he's ani rochev al chamor. He's a poor person riding on the donkey. So on the one hand, we had Daniel describing this heavenly being coming down from Shemayim, and then we have Zechariah describing this poor man on a donkey. Which is it? Says the Gemara in source number 7, the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadichet, Zachu, if we are meriting it, if Am Yisrael deserves it, Imanani Shemaya. This miraculous, amazing thing will happen out of nowhere. Lo zachu, if we don't merit it, ani rochev al chamor. It's going to be this slow process where we don't even see it happening. You just see a poor man on a donkey, and you don't even realize that Mashiach is coming. There's no doubt that if we step back and analyze this for a moment, we're sadly in the second category at the moment. We're not Am Yisrael in a place where we're deserving of Hashem giving us these miracles. We're not in that place. So it's the Ani Rochev al Chamor. It's this gradual, slow process that, by the way, we can see playing out in front of our eyes. We can see how it can get to a point where this happens. If I could just violate what the Rambam said for a moment, and let's speculate amongst ourselves. Go back for a moment to the beginning of the state of Israel, a little over 70 years ago, and see where we were. Who were the leaders at that time? The leaders at that time were people who, again, I never want to be misunderstood when I say this. I revere them for what they did and have complete and total respect, because we wouldn't be here without them. But they were not religious people. Not just not religious, they were anti-religious. Think about for a moment, the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, of the Jewish state, does not outright say God. because they didn't want to have a say God. They came to a compromise with the religious, and it says Tzur Yisrael, Rock of Israel. One of the people who signed the declaration, if you look at any of the copies of it, he wrote Be'ezrat Hashem, and that was his way of getting God's name onto it. But we were very far from being a spiritual people. Fast forward to now, we're in a very, very different place. I can tell you without a doubt, if the Declaration of Independence was being written today, they would put God's name in it. I think about what happens in Israel on Shavuot night, when I'm blessed at times to be honored to, non-corona times, to go speak to hundreds and hundreds of quote-unquote secular Israelis who come to learn Torah all night on Shavuot. We're in a very, very different place. And you can see a scenario. I was sitting in the Knesset when the president of Israel put a kippah on his head and said a bracha of Shehachianu in front of the whole Knesset, right? I was in the Knesset. The speaker of the Knesset was Shomer Torah Mitzvot. We recently had defense minister Shomer Torah Mitzvot, meaning things are happening where it's much more acceptable and religious people are in positions we never would have dreamed of before. And Am Yisrael is in a place that we never would have dreamed of before, even though we still have our fights with one another on religion and state issues, and that's a very difficult situation to be in. There's a process that's taking place. By the way, I'll share a little secret with all of you. In one of my early conversations that I had with Yair Lapid, when I was in this crazy process of exploring joining a party that in a million years I would have never imagined being part of, and just trying to be part of the process of bringing Achdut to Am Yisrael and bringing religious and secular together, I asked him, because he told me he believes in God and believes that God's involved in running the world. I asked him, when do you think that happened for broader Israel? Because it seems to be what I hear everywhere I go. People are not necessarily believing in Har Sinai and keeping Torah mitzvot, but they're much more connected than they were in the past. And he said it was the 6-Day War. He said the 6-Day War, the secular Israel saw this happen, and they realized it can't just be Kochi va'otzem yadi. There's some other forces that are at work over here, and that actually awakened something inside of secular Israel. And now I actually believe it's on the religious side to wake up and try to tap into that and try to help inspire people even more. But we're in a place where I think all of us can absolutely see a scenario where at some point a leader who's a Talmid Chacham, who's charismatic, who people can relate to, can rise up and inspire the people. And the people can rally around that person and say, we want you to be our leader. And then who knows what can happen after that in terms of the process. Now, there are many, many indications as we read some of the Nevi'im and see what's supposed to happen in the Yemot HaMashiach. It's very, very possible that we, even in this time, are experiencing some of these things. Let's go for an example just to this pasuk that you see in source number 8, Yeshayahu, where he describes what seems like the miraculous. Az tipachna einei ivrim, the eyes of the blind will open, va'aznei chershim tipatachna, and deaf people will be able to hear. Az yadalei kayal piseach, those who weren't able to walk will be able to walk. And we say to ourselves, well, that's not right. I mean, that sounds super miraculous. But how about this approach? How about saying those who are blind will be able to see? Maybe that's laser surgery, where someone who needs glasses at the moment, but now technology comes along and says, you can see. How about cochlear implants for people who are deaf? It's unbelievable. People who couldn't hear, now they can hear. How about prosthetics for people, or robotics for people who are not able to walk? We're living in a time where those prophecies, you can see how the wheels are in motion to bringing us towards that point. And there's amazing, amazing things that we see throughout the sources in the Midrashim. And I'm not going to quote all of them to you right now, but I just want to show some. So first of all, in source number 9, that you see the Medrash Rabbah says, Bo'orei, kol ma shehika kadosh baruch hu ba'olam hazeh, merapeh otan la'atid lavo. The whole idea of finding cures for diseases. No, we have not found all the cures, but it's unbelievable in terms of the world that we live in and how we're slowly but surely finding cures to various diseases. So All of those things can be the interpretation of what we mean when we say the incredible things that are going to happen when Mashiach comes. We have sources, by the way, that talk about technology, that talk about manual labor becoming obsolete. We have sources that talk about all the curses of Adam and Chava becoming undone. So yes, we still, in the Messianic times, so yes, we still worry about our parnassah, and there's no doubt that's what it means when it talks about by the sweat of your brow, but the literal idea of Mazed HaPecha, of having to work with hard labor, certainly technology has taken that away. I always hesitate to give this example, so I apologize especially to the mothers and the women, but there are those who suggest that the fact that, now my wife never chose this approach. My wife, we never had any interventions at all in the childbirth. She's a real courageous and strong woman, but the idea that a woman can today have childbirth and just have an epidural, have zero pain along the way, I've seen Rabbanim who have said that could be an element of that curse being undone. But put aside the epidural, just the fact that we have so much in terms of technology to help during the process of childbirth, both the life of the woman and the child, that certainly can be a part of that as well. We are taught that in the lead up to the time of Mashiach, the world's going to be less spiritual, it's going to be less moral. We have traditions that the Jewish people will split into different groups. That was something which did not exist until really the mid-19th century in an official manner, that we have official different groups. You had people way back, we certainly had in terms of stukim and things like that, but then for the whole time that we were in Galut, it was you were a religious Jew or you're not a religious Jew. But all of a sudden you have all these different groups, that's part of the tradition as well. We're taught specifically that places of education are going to be godless and will teach people, will be places of immorality, that parents and the elderly will not be respected. That's straight out in the Gemara. I don't know about all of you. I never in my life could have imagined saying no to my father or my mother. And that's not so long ago, right? Just a few decades ago, I could not have imagined that. And we're in a very different place in today's world, that's for sure. And you can just see how we're on the wrong path. So on the one hand, it's the wrong path. On the other hand, it's the path, according to Chazal, of Moshiach. Now, here's an amazing thing. There are sources that do talk about as a first step towards Moshiach of the Jews having some kind of political independence. And the Ramban in Shir HaShirim says straight out that our return to Eretz Yisrael in the time of the coming of Moshiach will come, he says, B'reshut HaMelachim, with the permission of the kings. I'm sure for a few hundred years, people read that Ramban and they said, the permission of the kings? How could that ever happen? There's no mechanism for that to happen. And then you have the League of Nations, which then becomes the United Nations, and you all of a sudden have a mechanism for the world to say, actually it goes before that to the Balfour Declaration, actually, but then you go to the UN vote in 1947, that we now have a mechanism where the kings of the world come together and give us the right to come back to Eretz Yisrael. An amazing thing. And I'm not going to go into, I have a standard shiur that I give about Yom HaAtzmaut, about how we're clearly living in the Atchalta de Geula, the re-flourishing of the land of Israel, the kibbutz galuyot that we're experiencing. It's so obvious if we open our eyes that we're experiencing all of these points, which we're taught will happen when the Mashiach is coming. I want to end with just one Rambam, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. But source number 10, because I just feel it's beautiful. And again, by the way, going back to what I said at the beginning, I never knew these words until my Amen Boys Choir came out with a song with these words, and now all of a sudden I'm an expert in this Rambam. But source number 10 is the Rambam in Hilchot Melachim, Perek Yibet Halacha Daled, Lo nitavu hachamim b'hanevim limot haMashiach. Our chachamim, our leaders, did not desire the time of Mashiach, lo kadei sheishlatu al kol ha'olam. It wasn't so that we, the Jewish people, can rule over the world. But lo kadei sheyerdu ba'akum, not that we can give it back to the nations of the world that have given us so much trouble. But lo kadei sheinasu otam ha'amim, and not so that the world will give the Jews kavod. But lo kadei lechol v'lishton v'lismoach, and it was not so that we can have food and drink and be happy. Why do they want Mashiach? They wanted to have the peace of mind to be able to sit and learn Torah and grow in God's wisdom. We won't have things that disrupt us from that. Because they want it to be zocher in Olam Haba. That's why they wanted Mashiach to come, because it's all about Avodat Hashem. It's not about the pride of the Jewish people. It's about being in a better place while we're in this world to help us reach a better place in Olam Haba. Because we have to always remind ourselves that's why we're here. We are not here in order to bring Mashiach. We are here to follow Torah mitzvot, to do what Hashem commands us. Certainly being in Eretz Yisrael is a part of that. That's why we're here, and we do what we have to do. B'ezrat Hashem, things will happen, and this Mashiach will emerge. Now, by the way, again, that could be in a natural process, or it could be in that supernatural process. But the goal is for us to be able to be better of the Hashem and feel a closer connection to Hashem to help us for Olam Haba. Remember, that means the Mashiach himself, we have traditions, will pass away, and his successor will come from his children, presumably his son. And Tchiyat HaMeitim happens at some later point after Mashiach comes. But first we have a Beit HaMikdash, which enables us to serve Hashem the way we're supposed to. We have a leader who inspires us to be closer to Hashem. And we are free from the troubles of fighting for our lives. And we are free from the troubles of the jealousies and the competitions and the drive for the physical that we have in this world, to free us to be able to serve Hashem and focus on Torah and mitzvot. That is the ultimate goal. And therefore, certainly during these 9 days, as we head towards what hopefully won't be Tisha B'Av, but sadly, the years have shown us that we might be in that position. But nevertheless, what's our avodah supposed to be? So on the one hand, the avodah, and I mentioned this in a few different settings this year, definitely has to be not the topic of tonight's shiur, and that is rectifying the sin of the spies. The sin of the spies is what led to all the tragedies and all of Tisha B'Av, and that is the lack of, for those who don't live in Eretz Yisrael, appreciation that we have this gift and coming to live in Eretz Yisrael. But even if we're living here, to fully appreciate what it means that we're living in Eretz Yisrael and rising to the occasion of what that means and giving thanks to Hashem for that opportunity and really appreciating and rectifying the gift in that way, making sure that we say good things about Eretz Yisrael as much as possible and not share the negative, but also this avodah of Mashiach, of working on ourselves, that we daven every day for Mashiach and we hope for Mashiach and we work towards Mashiach because of the goal of avodat Hashem, of helping us as Am Yisrael, being people who as a whole are closer to Hashem, and then hopefully, God willing, inspiring the world to come closer to Hashem. We always have to think about what we daven about at Rosh Hashanah. It's not just for Am Yisrael, but we talk about the whole world coming together and serving God. And we, as the Jews in Israel, serve as the inspiration for all of that. So hopefully, all of us will be zocheh to experiencing this, whether it's the process of a human being in our world emerging as that leader who brings Am Yisrael together and inspires them, or maybe we do cross that finish line and Hashem says now we are zocheh and brings it in a miraculous way.